Chapter 1. Empty Nest, Empty Pages. Brad Simpson had officially started talking to his coffee maker. It wasn't a habit he was proud of, but it had slowly developed sometime between his daughter's first year of college and the day he realized she didn't need him to drive her anywhere anymore. "Morning, champ," he muttered, tapping the side of the coffee pot as it sputtered and gurgled. "You and me, buddy, still holding the household together." The machine responded with a long, sad hiss, an accurate metaphor for his 40s. Brad sighed and poured his coffee into the chipped world's okayest dad mug that Rebecca had given him on Father's Day. She'd been 14 then, all braces and sarcasm. Now she was 19, brilliant, busy, and barely home. He took a sip, grimaced, and said, "Burnt again." Perfect. The house was too quiet. It had been that way for a while, but lately the silence had weight to it, pressing in around the edges of his mornings. He missed the sounds of teenage chaos, the blender screaming at 7 a.m. The music leaking through Rebecca's bedroom door, the constant ping of her text messages. Now she left early, came home late, and existed somewhere in the blurred hours between adulthood and independence. He was proud of her, of course. She was studying artificial intelligence programming at the local university, had a job tutoring high school kids, and treated life like a puzzle she intended to solve with coffee and willpower. But still, there were moments when Brad caught himself standing in the hallway outside her room, staring at the closed door, remembering the years when she'd run to him for everything. He missed being needed. He carried his mug to the kitchen table and glanced at the calendar pinned beside the fridge. His 42nd birthday was 3 days away. 42. Not old, exactly, but definitely too old to keep saying things like, "I'll figure it out soon." After the divorce, figuring it out had become his motto. 7 years later, he was still workshopping it. Helen, his ex-wife, had left in a whirlwind of expensive perfume and overdrawn credit cards. She'd married her colleague a week after the divorce finalized, which was, in Brad's opinion, suspiciously efficient. Rebecca had chosen to stay with him without hesitation. At 15, she'd been furious but wise enough to see what her mother had done. When Helen and her new husband moved to Europe, promising postcards and phone calls, Brad had secretly hoped she'd follow through, for Rebecca's sake, not his. But aside from a few half-hearted messages and one awkwardly chosen birthday gift, a pink scarf Rebecca never wore, Helen had faded from their lives like a bad dream. And somehow, through all of that, he and Rebecca had made a home again. Just the two of them. They'd budgeted, scrimped, rebuilt their credit, and learned to laugh at life's absurdities. He still remembered the day she'd handed him a stack of coupons and said, "We're poor, but we're efficient." They were a team. Always had been. But lately, the team was branching out. She had classes, a social life, her best friend Linda practically living in their kitchen, and Brad. Well, Brad had spreadsheets and leftovers. He stared into his coffee, frowning. "You know, this is getting pathetic." The coffee maker didn't argue. He stood, stretched, and walked over to the small shelf near the door where he kept his mail. Junk, bill, pre-approved credit card, and, one bright orange flyer. He pulled it out, reading aloud. "Rediscover your voice. Saturday evening writer's workshop at the Maplewood Public Library. All levels welcome." Brad tilted his head. Writing workshop? Huh. He'd always loved reading. Thrillers, mysteries, books where people got framed for murder but cleared their name by the last chapter. He used to think maybe he could write one, someday. Then life happened. Mortgage, family, divorce, laundry, and someday turned into probably never. But now, maybe he finally had time. He looked around his quiet house and muttered, "Well, coffee maker, it's either this or join a bowling league." The coffee maker offered no opinion. Saturday evening, Maplewood Public Library. Brad stood outside the community room, clutching a brand new notebook like it was a ticket to another life. He'd even bought a nice pen for the occasion, because if you were going to have an existential crisis, you might as well write it down in style. Through the glass door, he could see a dozen people chatting and setting up laptops. There was an urn of coffee on a side table, a plate of cookies, and an energy that felt friendly. He took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped inside. The room went quiet for half a second, enough time for him to feel like he'd walked into the wrong classroom. Then a cheerful voice broke through. "New face. Come in, come in." The speaker was a woman in her 60s with silver hair, big glasses, and the kind of smile that could sell anything from Girl Scout cookies to self-confidence. "I'm Mrs. Jenkins," she said, shaking his hand. "We're thrilled to have a new writer." "Oh, I'm not really. Nonsense. Everyone's a writer. Some of us just need caffeine to admit it." He smiled, immediately disarmed. "Then I'm definitely qualified." He found an empty seat near the back and tried to look invisible. Around him sat a lively mix of people, a teenage girl doodling in a notebook, a retired man with an impressive mustache, a woman knitting while typing with one hand, and a redhead. Fiery hair, sharp green eyes, mid-40s, probably. She was laughing with the man beside her, effortlessly magnetic. She had the kind of presence that made the whole room seem a little more awake. When the introduction started, Brad realized she was Maggie McCardel, marketing consultant, part-time writer, self-proclaimed caffeine enthusiast. "I write because it's cheaper than therapy," she said when it was her turn, earning a round of laughs. Then it was Brad's turn. He cleared his throat. Hi, I'm Brad Simpson. I read a lot, but I've never really written. I thought I'd, Give it a shot. Mrs. Jenkins smiled. And what do you like to read, Brad? Mostly thrillers. Murder, suspense, people keeping secrets. The redhead, Maggie, arched an eyebrow. So no romantic poetry then? Brad shrugged, deadpan. Only if the murderer leaves a love note. The room laughed, and Brad relaxed. He stayed quiet for most of the evening, listening, jotting notes, wondering if anyone could tell that he felt like an imposter. But when the meeting ended, Maggie stopped by his chair and said, "You've got good timing. Timing. In your jokes. It's a writer's instinct. Use it." Then she winked, slung her bag over her shoulder, and left him standing there grinning like an idiot. That night, Brad sat at his computer, opened a blank document, and typed the words, Chapter 1, A Man Buys a Coffee Maker. Then he laughed, deleted it, and wrote instead, "Maybe it's time for something new." Chapter 2, The Writers Group. Brad had always thought of libraries as quiet places. The Maplewood Public Library on a Saturday night was less so. When he arrived for his second session, laughter floated out of the community room like music from a sitcom set. Someone was reading aloud in a dramatic voice while the rest of the group groaned and cheered. He hesitated at the door, notebook in hand, suddenly aware that he was about to walk into a room full of people who actually knew what they were doing. "Ah, our thriller man returns." Mrs. Jenkins called the second she spotted him. Brad winced good-naturedly. "You remember that? Writers never forget good material," she said, ushering him inside. "Find a seat, Brad. Tonight we're critiquing the homework from last week." Homework. He had missed that part. He slid into an empty chair in the back row and opened his notebook to a blank page, trying to look like someone who'd definitely done the homework. Maggie McCardel was already there, of course, sitting in the front like she owned the place. Her red hair was piled into a messy knot, reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. She was mid-conversation with a retired firefighter named Stan, waving her hands animatedly as she explained the importance of believable dialogue. Stan looked terrified. Brad chuckled under his breath. Mrs. Jenkins clapped her hands. "All right, everyone. Who wants to go first?" A college student volunteered, a shy guy named Tim who read a science fiction story about alien diplomats arguing over intergalactic trade routes. When he finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then Maggie said gently, "It's clever, Tim. But maybe less trade, more aliens." The group laughed, Tim grinned, and the ice broke. When it was Maggie's turn, she read a scene about a woman trying to return a blender after a breakup because it reminded her of her ex. It was funny, sharp, and oddly moving. The whole room applauded. Mrs. Jenkins beamed. "You've got a voice, Maggie." Maggie glanced back at Brad. "It's all in the dialogue," she said. "People talk like they're fencing, jab, parry, retreat." Brad nodded. "Unless you're me. Then it's more like tripping over the sword." That earned him another laugh, and he felt himself relax. By the end of the night, he'd shared nothing of his own work, mostly because he hadn't written anything yet, but he left buzzing with ideas. He went home, sat down at his computer, and typed for an hour. It wasn't much, just a short story about a man who accidentally buys a haunted toaster on eBay, but it was something. When he brought it to the next meeting, Maggie laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. "Brad," she said, wiping her eyes, "if you ever write a novel about possessed kitchen appliances, I'll buy 10 copies." "Good to know my target audience," he said. She smirked. Middle-aged women with a fear of small electronics. Their banter became a regular feature of the workshop. Every week, he'd read something new, she'd critique it with a mix of honesty and mischief, and Mrs. Jenkins would shake her head like a proud matchmaker watching two stubborn people pretend they weren't perfect scene partners. 6 months later, the group felt less like a class and more like a family. Brad had written half a dozen short stories, most of them terrible, a few surprisingly decent. Maggie had produced a collection of witty essays about modern life, which Mrs. Jenkins swore she could publish tomorrow if she wanted to. Then, one evening, everything changed. Mrs. Jenkins stood at the front of the room with an envelope in her hand and an expression that could only mean she was about to drop a bombshell. "I have exciting news," she announced. "Our little workshop has been invited to participate in a regional project hosted by Harper Bridge Publishing." The room gasped in unison. Even the knitting woman looked up. "They're sponsoring a collaborative writing contest," Mrs. Jenkins continued. "Each team will write a short novel. The winning team receives a publishing contract and a modest advance." "Modest," Stan muttered. "That means coffee money." "Correct," Mrs. Jenkins said cheerfully. "Now, the fun part. Teams and genres will be chosen at random." A ripple of nervous laughter spread around the room. Maggie raised her hand. "Define random." Mrs. Jenkins held up a bowl filled with folded slips of paper. "One bowl for names, one for genres." "It'll be completely impartial," Brad muttered. "This is how horror stories start." Maggie grinned. "Relax, thriller man. What's the worst that could happen?" The drawings began. Pairs were called out amid applause and groans. Stan and Tim, science fiction. Jill and Melanie, historical drama. Roger and Emily, fantasy. Finally, Mrs. Jenkins reached for the last 2 slips. She unfolded the first name and smiled. "Brad Simpson." Brad straightened in his chair. "And his partner will be." She drew again. "Maggie McCardel." Maggie's eyes widened. "Oh, this'll be fun." Brad blinked. "Fun? You're terrifying." "Thank you. What's our genre, Mrs. Jenkins?" The instructor unfolded the final slip with a flourish. "Romance." Silence. Then a collective "oh" from the rest of the group. Maggie blinked once, then twice. Romance. Brad buried his face in his hands. I'm doomed. Mrs. Jenkins clapped. You two will do wonderfully. Opposites attract, after all. Maggie looked at Brad. Guess we're about to test that theory. After the meeting, Brad tried to make a graceful exit, but Maggie caught up to him in the hallway, tossing her purse over her shoulder. Coffee, she said. He frowned. Like, right now. Unless you have pressing haunted toaster business. He hesitated, then nodded. Sure. Why not? They ended up at a little cafe 2 blocks away, sitting across from each other with steaming mugs between them. So, Maggie said, leaning forward, confession time. I haven't written a romance in my life. Same. I can handle humor, drama, irony, but love stories? No clue where to start. Brad shrugged. My last attempt at romance ended with a divorce lawyer, so I'm not exactly qualified either. She laughed, genuine and loud enough that the barista smiled. This should be interesting. He took a sip of his coffee. Maybe we just fake it till we make it? You mean, pretend we know what love feels like? Exactly. She considered that, then said with a crooked grin. Or we could actually figure it out. He raised an eyebrow. You mean, research? We could go on a few practice dates. See what happens. For the sake of the book, of course. Brad almost choked on his coffee. Practice dates. Maggie smirked. Strictly academic. You up for it, thriller man? He stared at her, trying to tell if she was joking. She looked perfectly serious, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. Well, he said slowly, if we end up with another haunted appliance, I'm blaming you. Deal. They clinked their coffee mugs together like conspirators. And just like that, the research phase of their romance novel, whatever that meant, officially began. Chapter 3, Practice Makes Awkward. Brad Simpson's first official practice date began with panic. He'd woken up Saturday morning convinced that the entire idea was ridiculous. 2 middle-aged people pretending to fall in love so they could write about it? It sounded like something out of a Netflix movie Rebecca would roast him for watching. Still, he couldn't exactly back out now. Maggie had texted him the night before. Maggie, tomorrow, 6 p.m. casual dinner. Think charming, not desperate. Brad, what's the difference? Maggie, deodorant and confidence. He'd stared at that last message for a full minute before laughing, and then worrying about whether he had the right deodorant. By 5:55 p.m., Brad stood outside the Velvet Spoon, a cozy little bistro known for its mismatched chairs and overpriced appetizers. He checked his reflection in the window, shirt tucked, hair mostly cooperating, nerves doing jumping jacks. Then he saw her. Maggie walked up the sidewalk in jeans and a navy sweater, hair loose around her shoulders, green eyes sharp and amused. She looked like she'd walked out of a commercial for Autumn or Confidence, maybe both. Wow, Brad said before his brain caught up. You look nice. Maggie grinned. You sound surprised. I'm just, stating facts. Relax, Brad. It's not a real date. We're just doing research. Right? He said, tugging at his collar. Research? She raised an eyebrow. You wore a button down for research? He muttered. Science deserves respect. Inside, the Velvet Spoon buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses. A host led them to a small table by the window. Candlelight flickered between them, which, Brad noticed with mild alarm, was way too romantic for a practice anything. The waiter appeared. Can I start you off with something to drink? Maggie ordered a glass of red wine. Brad, trying to sound worldly, said, same for me. The waiter nodded. Cabernet or Merlot? Brad froze. The red one. Maggie smothered a laugh behind her menu. Smooth. See, this is why I write thrillers, he whispered. No one expects the hero to know his wine. They ordered dinner. She picked pasta. He went with chicken parmesan, and spent the next few minutes talking about anything but romance. Work, hobbies, Rebecca's college stories, Maggie's giant family, 6 siblings, 4 nieces, 3 nephews, 1 dog with emotional issues. The conversation flowed easily until Maggie steered them back to business. So, she said, sipping her wine, our protagonists meet cute. Classic start. How do they fall in love? Brad frowned. You're asking me? I'm the guy who once called a woman's perfume medicinal by accident. She chuckled. You're hopeless. Okay, what's your idea of romance? He thought for a moment. Something steady, real, not grand gestures or fireworks. More like 2 people who make each other's lives easier instead of harder. Maggie tilted her head. That's not bad, actually. Yeah? What about you? Romance is laughter, she said. If I can laugh with someone, everything else works itself out. Then you'd make a terrible thriller partner. Probably, she said, smiling. But a great co-writer. Dinner went well, until dessert. Brad had just finished describing his favorite mystery author when the waiter reappeared with 2 slices of cheesecake, compliments of the chef. Why? Brad asked suspiciously. The waiter smiled. He says you're our cutest new couple. Brad blinked. We're not. Maggie cut him off, beaming at the waiter. That's so sweet. Tell him thank you. When the waiter left, Brad leaned forward. Couple. Maggie shrugged, smirking. You have to admit, it's good cover for our research. Research? Right. Relax, thriller man, she teased. You're blushing. He was, and she clearly enjoyed it. After dinner, they strolled down Main Street, laughing about the waiter and trading embarrassing stories. Brad told her about the time he'd fallen asleep during Rebecca's choir recital. There was organ music. It was hypnotic. Maggie admitted she once sent a love letter to the wrong guy in high school. He laminated it and still brings it up at reunions. They reached a little park by the river. The air was crisp, stars faint above the streetlights. Maggie slowed her pace. So, she said softly, how would you write this scene? Brad glanced at her. What scene? This one. The ending to a perfect first date. How would you describe it? He hesitated. Probably something like, they both knew it wasn't supposed to feel this easy, but somehow it did. Maggie smiled. Not bad, Simpson. Then she reached over and took his hand. Just for a second, a brief, warm touch that made every coherent thought in Brad's brain short-circuit. When she let go, she said, research complete, and walked ahead with that infuriating, teasing grin. Brad followed, shaking his head. Yeah, he muttered, we're definitely in trouble. The next morning, Rebecca found him sitting at his computer, staring at a blank document again. Writer's block? She asked. Something like that. She leaned over his shoulder. So, how was your date? It wasn't a date, he said quickly. It was research. Rebecca folded her arms. Uh-huh. And what did you research exactly? Brad sighed. Cheesecake and humiliation. She laughed. Sounds promising. I don't know how to write romance, Becca. Maggie and I are just faking it. Rebecca grinned. Maybe stop faking it and actually enjoy it. He looked at her. Enjoy what? She shrugged, all innocence. The practice. Chapter 4. Titanic lessons. If there was one thing Brad Simpson had learned about women, it was that when two of them were whispering in his kitchen, nothing good was about to happen. He stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, listening to the sounds of muffled laughter and clinking plates. Rebecca and her best friend, Linda, were huddled at the counter like two spies exchanging classified intel. Every now and then, one of them glanced toward the living room, then back at the other with matching grins. Brad sipped his coffee. Yup, he thought, this is how ambushes start. Dad, Rebecca said when she finally noticed him. Perfect timing. We were just talking about you. That's never a comforting sentence, he muttered. Linda turned, that mischievous spark in her eyes. We have an idea. Oh good, Brad said flatly. Because the last one went so smoothly. Rebecca rolled her eyes. Relax. You survived your practice date with Maggie. We're just here to make sure you two don't lose momentum. Brad raised a brow. Momentum? What do you think this is, Formula One dating? Linda grinned. Pretty much. And your next pit stop is movie night. He frowned. Movie night. Rebecca crossed her arms, channeling the same determined expression that had once convinced him to let her adopt a turtle in 3rd grade. Dad, if you and Maggie are supposed to write a romance, you need to see one. Study the classics. Learn the rhythm. I've seen romantic movies, he said defensively. Name one, Rebecca challenged. Brad thought hard. Die Hard. Both girls groaned in unison. Dad, Rebecca said, exasperated, that's not a romance. It's about love and sacrifice, he argued. He literally crosses the country to get his wife back. Linda laughed. Through broken glass and explosions. That's not love, that's trauma bonding. Rebecca turned to Linda. Okay, new rule. We pick the movie. Brad sighed. Fine, but nothing where the dog dies. No dogs, Rebecca promised. Just icebergs. Later that evening, Maggie arrived at his house carrying a grocery bag and her trademark half-smile. I brought reinforcements, she said, holding up a bottle of red wine and a bag of microwave popcorn. Brad stared at them. That's oddly specific. Your daughter texted me, Maggie said, breezing past him into the kitchen. She said we're having a movie night. Of course she did. She also said you'd resist. I'm not resisting, Brad said. I'm bracing. Maggie chuckled, opening the wine. You're cute when you're flustered. Don't say that, he said quickly. I'm trying to maintain some dignity. Too late, she teased. They settled on the couch, the TV glowing in the dim light. Rebecca and Linda had apparently set up the whole thing. Candles on the coffee table, a cozy blanket draped over the back of the couch, even a bowl of chocolate-covered almonds. It looked less like a research session and more like the trailer for a Hallmark movie. Brad glanced around suspiciously. This feels like a trap. It's homework, Maggie said innocently, pressing play. The iconic Titanic theme swelled through the speakers. Brad groaned. Oh, come on, he said. This isn't a romance, it's a disaster movie. Maggie gave him a look. It's one of the greatest love stories ever told. Yeah, right, he said. She cheats on her fiancé, lies to everyone, and then watches her boyfriend freeze to death. You're impossible, she said, laughing. It's a horror story disguised as a love story. The moral is, never trust a rich girl on a sinking ship. Shoo, she said, tossing a piece of popcorn at him. You're ruining it. He caught the popcorn midair. I'm improving it. By the time Rose was drawing Jack like one of her French girls, Brad had an entire commentary running. Oh sure, now she's an artist, he muttered. Meanwhile, the ship's crew is like, ma'am, could you not undress during an iceberg alert? Maggie laughed so hard she nearly spilled her wine. Brad, you're missing the point. No, I'm missing logic. If I were on a ship about to sink, I'd be looking for lifeboats, not sketch pads. When the ship hit the iceberg, Brad leaned forward, vindicated. Here we go. Consequences. Maggie smacked his arm. You're cheering for the iceberg? Team Iceberg, he said solemnly. It's the only character that makes sense. She was laughing too hard to respond, and he realized with a small jolt that he liked making her laugh. It wasn't the polite, careful laughter people gave him at work. It was open, unfiltered, musical. The kind of laugh that made the room feel brighter. When the credits rolled, Maggie wiped her eyes. Beautiful, she said softly. Brad shook his head. Tragic. A guy gives everything, and she lets him freeze. She loved him, Brad. She hogged the door, Maggie. Maggie smiled. You're hopeless. I'm realistic. Maybe too realistic, she said. You ever think romance isn't supposed to make sense? It's not about practicality, it's about connection. Brad looked at her, her face still glowing in the flickering light of the TV. Maybe that's my problem, he said quietly. I've spent too long looking for logic in emotions. Maggie tilted her head. Maybe logic's overrated. Easy for you to say. You didn't have a marriage that exploded like a fireworks factory. She nodded slowly. Fair point. But maybe that's exactly why you should stop analyzing it. Just let it be what it is. Brad exhaled, smiling faintly. You're better at this than I am. I'm Irish, she said. We're born romantics. Comes with the accent. Unfair advantage. Complain all you want, she teased, standing. Next time, I pick the movie again. Please tell me it doesn't involve another shipwreck. No promises. After she left, Brad sat for a long moment in the quiet living room, surrounded by empty popcorn bowls and the faint scent of Maggie's perfume lingering in the air. He picked up his laptop and opened a blank document titled Project Romance. His fingers hovered over the keys. He started typing. She laughed like someone who'd forgotten how for a while, but was relearning in real time. And somehow, that made him want to keep being funny, just to see her remember again. Brad stopped, reread the sentence, and smiled. Maybe this whole practice date thing wasn't such a bad idea after all. The next morning, Rebecca peeked into the living room to find him typing furiously. Wow, she said, someone's inspired. Don't start, Brad said without looking up. She leaned on the doorway, grinning. So, Team Iceberg, huh? He groaned. She told you. She tells me everything. Of course she does. Rebecca smiled. You liked her, didn't you? Brad paused. Maggie. No, the iceberg, she said dryly. Yes, Maggie. He hesitated. She's interesting. Rebecca smirked. That's dad code for adorable, but terrifying. He looked up, eyes twinkling. You know me too well. I'm your daughter, she said, crossing the room to kiss his cheek. You deserve a little terrifying. That night, Brad sent Maggie a text. Brad. So, for research, next week, you pick the movie. Maggie. Excellent. Prepare yourself. Brad. Should I be worried? Maggie. Only if you dislike dancing. Brad blinked at the screen. Dancing, he muttered. This was definitely getting out of hand. But for the first time in a long while, he couldn't wait to find out what happened next. Chapter 5. The Dance Disaster. Brad Simpson didn't fear many things anymore. He'd survived a soul-sucking divorce, raising a teenager, and a plumbing bill that could have funded a small nation. He'd faced tax audits, in-laws, and the horrors of IKEA assembly instructions. But this was new. This was dancing. And not the kind of dancing he'd done at weddings, the kind where you sway in a semicircle while pretending you've still got rhythm. No, Maggie had apparently signed them up for an actual class. With instructors. And mirrors. He stared at the studio sign. Ballroom Basics for Beginners. Rediscover the romance. Rediscover the what? He muttered. Romance, Maggie said cheerfully, walking beside him in a flowing skirt and sneakers. You know, the thing we're allegedly writing about. I was hoping to imagine it, not physically risk injury. You'll survive, she said, opening the door. It's just dancing. Just dancing, Brad repeated. That's like saying it's just skydiving without the parachute. Inside, the studio smelled faintly of lemon polish and mild panic. A dozen couples stood around the polished floor while a perky instructor in a sequined vest clapped her hands. Welcome, everyone. Tonight we're learning the rumba. Brad blinked. Isn't that a vacuum cleaner? Maggie elbowed him, grinning. Behave. The instructor, whose name tag read Darlene, Queen of Rhythm, beamed at the class. The rumba is the dance of love and connection. Find your partner, make eye contact, and remember, romance starts with trust. Brad looked at Maggie. I already don't trust this. Relax, she said, placing her hand in his. It's just 1, 2, 3. He stepped on her foot. Ow. Sorry. That was the 3. You skipped 2. I panicked. Darlene clapped again. Gentlemen, lead with confidence. Ladies, follow with grace. Maggie leaned closer. So basically, you stumble, and I pretend you meant to. That's our dynamic in a nutshell, he said. For the next half hour, they shuffled and twirled and tripped their way through the dance of love. Brad's foot found Maggie's toes more often than the rhythm, and Darlene's voice rang out like a motivational foghorn. Smile, everyone. Dancing is joy. Brad's smile looked like a hostage situation. When Darlene came over to help, Brad froze. Loosen up, she said, tugging at his shoulders. You're too stiff. I'm not stiff, he protested. You're basically a human ironing board, Maggie teased. Thank you, partner. Remember, Darlene said, placing his hand firmly on Maggie's back. Connection begins here. Brad's brain short-circuited. Maggie was warm beneath his palm, her laughter close to his ear. For a second, the mirrors, the class, even Darlene's chirpy commentary disappeared. Just him, her, the faint rhythm of the music. Then his shoe caught on hers again, and they both nearly went down. Connection lost. Maggie gasped, grabbing his arm to steady herself. The class burst into laughter, and Brad gave a sheepish bow. We're method actors, he said, practicing realism. After class, They collapsed onto a bench, panting and laughing. Well, Brad said, I think we've proven something important tonight. That you have 2 left feet? No, that I have a natural gift for slapstick. Maggie wiped a tear from her eye. I haven't laughed that hard in years. He grinned. Mission accomplished then. She turned to him, her smile softening. You know, you're not half bad when you stop overthinking. He raised a brow. Was that a compliment or a surprise? Little of both. He chuckled. I'll take it. As they walked out into the cool night air, Brad noticed the streetlights catching in her hair. She looked peaceful, content. It hit him that for all her confidence and teasing, there was a gentleness underneath, something quiet and steady that matched the part of him he didn't show often. Thanks for tonight, he said finally. She looked up. You're thanking me for public embarrassment? Hey, laughter counts as research, right? Absolutely. Then it was productive. She smiled. You're getting the hang of this. I'm a quick learner, he said. Next week, we tackle walking without injury. When Brad got home, Rebecca and Linda were waiting in the living room with identical smirks. How was the dancing? Rebecca asked sweetly. He shot her a look. I'd rather not talk about it. Linda leaned forward. That bad, huh? Let's just say my shoes filed for workers' comp. Rebecca giggled. Did you step on Maggie? Repeatedly. It's a miracle she still has ankles. But did you have fun? She pressed. Brad hesitated. Maybe a little. Rebecca grinned knowingly. You like her? I like that she hasn't sued me for bodily harm. Linda elbowed Rebecca. Translation, he totally likes her. Brad threw his hands up. Why do I feel like I'm in a reality show? Rebecca smiled. Because you kind of are. It's called Dad Learns to Date Again. Catchy, he said. Remind me not to renew for season 2. Later that night, as he was getting ready for bed, his phone buzzed. Maggie, still have all 10 toes. Miraculous. Brad, good to know. I was going to send flowers to your podiatrist. Maggie, huh? You weren't that bad. Brad, I was one misstep away from an insurance claim. Maggie, admit it, you had fun. Brad, maybe. But if you tell Rebecca, I'll deny everything. Maggie, your secret's safe. For now. He smiled at the screen. Brad, so what's next on the research schedule? Maggie, HM. Maybe something less hazardous. Coffee and writing session? Brad, perfect. No rumba, no icebergs. Just caffeine. Maggie, don't jinx it. The next afternoon, Brad met Sandy, Linda's mom, at the local coffee shop. She worked nearby and sometimes dropped in for a chat. So, Sandy said, sipping her latte. I hear you've been dancing. Brad groaned. Word travels fast. Small town, she said with a knowing smile. How's it going with Maggie? He shrugged. Good, I think. We're writing, laughing, not killing each other. That's a solid start. He nodded. It's nice, you know, having someone to talk to. Someone who doesn't just want to talk about bills or logistics or who forgot to unload the dishwasher. Sandy smiled warmly. You deserve nice, Brad. He looked at her curiously. You ever think about dating again? She shook her head. Not yet. I'm still figuring out who I am without someone else defining it. He nodded slowly. That's fair. Then she smiled. But I think you've done enough figuring out. Time to start living again. That night, Brad sat at his desk, typing furiously. The words flowed easily this time. Funny, warm, a little vulnerable. He wrote about 2 people learning to connect through laughter, through awkwardness, through mistakes that somehow made them closer. When he finished, he sent the draft to Maggie with a note. This might actually be turning into a love story. Her reply came a few minutes later. Maybe it already is. Chapter 6. Coffee, confessions, and creative chemistry. Saturday morning arrived with the smell of burnt toast and misplaced optimism. Brad stood in his kitchen wearing a world's okayest dad t-shirt, butter knife in one hand, wondering how something as simple as breakfast could still go wrong at 42. The toaster smoked ominously. He sighed, tossed the evidence, and muttered, at least coffee can't betray me. The universe disagreed. He'd barely poured the first cup when his phone buzzed. Maggie, on my way. Hope you're caffeinated and brilliant. Brad, one of those things is true. Guess which? Maggie, if it's not the caffeine, we're doomed. He smiled, feeling that now familiar flutter in his chest that had nothing to do with caffeine. Today was their first real writing session together. No dancing, no fake dates, no icebergs. Just 2 adults with laptops, coffee, and the shared delusion that they could write a romance novel without accidentally falling into one. Rebecca peeked into the kitchen just as he was setting up mugs and his laptop on the dining table. You look nervous, she said. Do I? He asked. She tilted her head. You checked the mirror 3 times in the last minute. Just making sure I don't have toast crumbs in my hair. Uh-huh. So this is the writing session? That's what we're calling it, he said, a little too quickly. Rebecca grinned. You like her? Don't start. I'm not starting. I'm observing. As a scientist. You're an AI student, not a psychologist. Same principle, she said, stealing a sip of his coffee. You're running an emotional algorithm. Go to college, he said, waving her off. Already am, she called, heading upstairs. And you're welcome for setting up your love life. He sighed. She's her mother's daughter when it comes to meddling, he muttered. Then, catching his reflection in the window, he added softly. But thankfully, not in any other way. Maggie arrived precisely 10 minutes later, wearing jeans, a cardigan, and that smile that always made him forget basic verbs. Morning, she said brightly, stepping inside. I brought scones. Brad blinked. You baked. Don't sound so surprised. I'm multifaceted. I was going to say brave. Bringing food into this house is a risk. My kitchen's cursed. Noted, she said, handing over the bag. No cooking experiments, then? None planned. But I can offer coffee strong enough to dissolve stress. Perfect. They settled at the table, laptops open, scones crumbling between them. Maggie's fingers flew over the keyboard with effortless confidence while Brad stared at his blinking cursor, trying to remember how sentences worked. After a minute, Maggie peeked over her screen. Stuck. Just finding the right opening line. Want to hear mine? Sure. She read aloud. He'd spent years building walls made of words, and then she showed up with a pen that could write through concrete. Brad stared. That's good. You sound surprised. Wow, yeah. That's really good. She smiled. Your turn. Up. He cleared his throat. The coffee was too hot, but he drank it anyway, because he had something to prove. Maggie burst out laughing. You're kidding. I write realism, he said defensively. Not poetry. Okay, Hemingway, she said, still chuckling. Let's try this together. They spent the next hour tossing ideas back and forth, building their story brick by brick. The fictional couple they were creating, a cautious single father and an impulsive journalist, started taking on lives of their own. They debated everything from character names to favorite pizza toppings. You realize these two sound a lot like us, Maggie said at one point, eyes twinkling. Brad looked up. Do they? Stubborn man who overthinks everything. Sharp-tongued woman who enjoys poking the bear. Sound familiar? He smirked. I resent the stubborn part. And I rest my case. They laughed, and the laughter didn't feel awkward or forced. It felt natural, like they'd been doing this for years. Sometime around noon, Rebecca appeared, phone in hand, pretending to need something from the fridge. Oh, she said, feigning surprise. You're still here, Maggie. Maggie smiled. Hi, Rebecca. We're working on our story. Sure you are, Rebecca said, pulling out a soda. Dad, you're using your serious face. I have a serious face? You do. It's your I'm totally not flirting face. Maggie choked on her scone. Excuse me. Rebecca waved. Just saying. I'll leave you two professionals to your writing. When she left, Brad groaned. I swear she's part CIA. Maggie laughed. She's adorable. She's devious, he corrected. She gets it from someone, Maggie said lightly. Not me, he said automatically, then hesitated. Okay, maybe a little. By mid-afternoon, they'd actually made progress. The story had heart, humor, a slow burn tension that made even Brad admit it was kind of romantic. Maggie leaned back, stretching. You know, for two people who claimed they couldn't write a love story, we're not terrible. Brad smiled. We might even be good. She met his gaze. You ever think maybe that's because we're not faking it anymore? He froze, caught off guard. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's easier to write about love when you're finally open to feeling it again. For a moment, the air between them felt heavier. Not uncomfortable, just charged, like the pause before a first kiss in every movie Rebecca had ever made him watch. Then Maggie broke the spell, clearing her throat. Anyway, scene 7. The first date. How do we make it feel real? Brad smirked. By not including dancing. Agreed. They decided to take a break, walking to the nearby park for fresh air. The day was cool, leaves crisp beneath their shoes, and the lake shimmered in the sunlight. Maggie carried her coffee like it was an accessory. Brad nursed his like it was a lifeline. Do you ever think, she said, how weird it is, starting over in your 40s? All the time, he said. Half the time I feel like I'm too old for new beginnings. The other half, I'm terrified I waited too long. Maggie nodded. Same. Everyone assumes if you're single past 40, it's by choice. Like we're all at some singles retirement club. I thought that club existed, he said. They call it a writing workshop. She laughed, bumping his shoulder. Touché. They sat on a bench overlooking the water. Ducks quacked. A kid nearby was trying, and failing, to fly a kite. For a few minutes, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Finally, Maggie said, You know what I like about you, Brad? He blinked. That's a dangerous sentence. You don't pretend, she said simply. You're awkward and honest, and you don't hide it behind charm or ego. He chuckled softly. That's because I don't have charm or ego. Exactly, she said, smiling. It's refreshing. Careful, he said. You're dangerously close to flirting. Maybe I am. Brad glanced at her, surprised, and maybe a little thrilled. But before he could respond, her phone buzzed, breaking the moment. Saved by the bell, she said, answering it. Hi sis, what? No, I'm not. Okay, fine. I'll call you later. She hung up, rolling her eyes. Family check-in. They think I've joined a cult. Brad grinned. The cult of fictional romance. Exactly. Membership includes caffeine and existential dread. They returned to his house to wrap up the session, both pretending the almost moment at the park hadn't happened. As Maggie gathered her things, she said lightly, Next time, maybe we write at my place. Change of scenery. Sure, he said. As long as your kitchen isn't cursed. Only slightly. He walked her to the door. She paused, hand on the handle. Thanks for today, Brad. You're good company. He smiled. So are you. See you Tuesday? It's a date, he said automatically, then flushed. I mean a writing session. She grinned. Of course. A writing session. Then she was gone, leaving him standing there, heart doing something it hadn't done in years, hoping. That evening, Rebecca came downstairs again, this time armed with a bowl of popcorn and the smirk of someone who'd solved a mystery. So, she said, plopping onto the couch beside him. You and Maggie seem cozy. We're writing, he said without looking up from his laptop. Sure. And Romeo and Juliet were just workshopping poetry. Rebecca, I'm happy for you, Dad. He blinked. You are? Yeah, she said softly. You deserve to laugh again. That caught him off guard. He turned to her. You really mean that? She smiled. Of course. I'm Team Dad, remember? He chuckled. Always. Just don't mess it up, she said, tossing popcorn at him. I'll do my best. Later that night, Maggie sent him a new draft of the story with a note at the top. Brad, I think our characters are finally falling for each other. Question is, are we writing fiction or foreshadowing? He stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Let's find out. He hit send, smiled to himself, and whispered, plot twist. Chapter 7, Writer's Retreat, and Other Dangerous Ideas. The email subject line read, Writing Retreat. This weekend. Bring ideas and coffee. Brad stared at it like it might self-destruct. He was still half asleep, sitting in front of his computer in a bathrobe that had seen better centuries, when he noticed the message from Maggie. The body of the email was cheerfully innocent. Hey, the library group is hosting a weekend writing retreat up at Lake Maribel. Cabins, campfires, workshops, and zero Wi-Fi. I already signed us up. You're welcome. Maggie, zero Wi-Fi. That was how horror movies started. He muttered, what could possibly go wrong? Rebecca's voice floated from the kitchen. You talking to yourself again, Dad? Yes. About a woman? No comment. She peeked around the corner, holding a spoonful of cereal. Your ears go pink when you lie. They do not. They do. It's science. He glared at her. Don't you have somewhere to be? Classes don't start till 10. She grinned. So where are you going with Maggie? Writing retreat. Library thing. Oh, cabins. Campfires. Slow burns. It's a professional event, he said firmly, emphasizing each syllable like punctuation marks. Uh-huh. So, should I text Linda that you're finally having your Hallmark movie moment? Do and I'll ground you. You can't ground me. I'm 19. I'll find a way. She laughed. You're adorable when you're flustered. Rebecca. Fine, fine, she said, waving her spoon like a white flag. Just have fun, okay? You've earned it. He paused, softening. Thanks, kiddo. Don't thank me. Thank Maggie. She's clearly doing the universe's work. By Friday evening, Brad's nerves were performing synchronized backflips. He double-checked his overnight bag. 2 shirts, 1 toothbrush, a notebook, and, because he wasn't completely stupid, deodorant and aspirin. He briefly considered bringing his laptop, then remembered the zero Wi-Fi part and decided paper and pencil would be more authentic. Or medieval. When Maggie pulled up outside, her little silver hatchback was already filled with enough bags to supply an expedition. Planning to move in? He asked, loading his duffel into the back. Writers need options, she said breezily. I pack by emotional contingency. That's not a thing. It is when you've dated men who forgot toothpaste and socks. He raised his hands in surrender. Fair enough. She grinned. Ready? As I'll ever be. They hit the road just as twilight settled, the city fading behind them in a wash of orange and violet. Maggie queued up a playlist titled Rom-Com Road Trip, which consisted mostly of 80s pop, acoustic love songs, and one unexpected bagpipe solo. Brad side-eyed her. Bagpipes. It's my Irish heritage. Don't mock the pipes. I wasn't. I was just startled. Good. Keeps you on your toes. He chuckled. You really enjoy making me uncomfortable, don't you? Only because you're cute when you're squirming. He choked on air. What? She smirked. Relax, Simpson. It's called banter. Right? Banter. I'm great at banter. You're adequate. They reached Lake Maribel 2 hours later, headlights sweeping across tall pines and the glimmer of moonlit water. The retreat consisted of 5 rustic cabins and a main lodge that smelled faintly of cinnamon and writerly despair. Inside, other members of the workshop were milling around with name tags and cocoa. Their instructor, Mrs. Talbot, a cheerful woman in her 60s, waved them over. Brad, Maggie, so glad you could make it. Her smile was all teeth and caffeine. We've got your cabin assignment. 2-person team, right? Brad froze. Cabin assignment? Mrs. Talbot handed Maggie a key with a wink. Number 4. Cozy little place near the lake. You'll love it. Wait, Brad said. As in one cabin? Don't worry, she said, misreading his horror. Separate beds. We're not that modern. Maggie gave him a sly smile. Guess we're roommates. Brad's brain short-circuited. Great. Fine. Totally fine. You're turning pink again, she said under her breath. It's cold, he lied. It's August. Cabin 4 was exactly what one would expect from the phrase cozy little place near the lake. 2 small beds, 1 fireplace, and enough rustic charm to make a lumberjack weep. A framed quote on the wall read, Write drunk, edit sober. Brad wondered if that was encouragement or a warning. Maggie dropped her bags and stretched. This is perfect. Smells like pine and potential. Smells like mothballs and regret, Brad muttered. Same thing. She lit the fireplace while Brad unpacked, setting his notebook carefully on the nightstand. The flickering light painted her hair in warm copper hues, and he caught himself watching her longer than was strictly polite. Earth to Brad. He blinked. Huh, you were staring. Again. Was not. You were. Don't worry, it's flattering. He groaned. You're going to tease me all weekend, aren't you? Absolutely. Dinner was served in the main lodge. Chili, cornbread, and enough coffee to power a newsroom. Afterward, Mrs. Talbot gathered everyone for an icebreaker exercise. Each team, she announced, will write a one-page scene tonight and perform it tomorrow. It should showcase emotional vulnerability and romantic tension. Brad nearly choked on his cornbread. Maggie, on the other hand, looked delighted. Oh, this'll be fun. Define fun, he whispered. Watching you squirm, she whispered back. Back in the cabin, they brainstormed. The fire crackled. Outside, crickets provided ambient soundtrack. Brad paced while Maggie scribbled ideas. Okay, she said. What about a scene where the hero and heroine get stuck together during a storm? He raised an eyebrow. Subtle. It's a classic. I thought you hated cliches. I love good cliches, she corrected. Besides, trapped together builds tension. He folded his arms. You're enjoying this way too much. Of course I am. You make an excellent reluctant hero. And you make an infuriating muse. She smiled sweetly. Compliment accepted. Around midnight, they finally had a draft. Maggie read it aloud, adopting a dramatically breathy tone. Why are you looking at me like that? She asked. Because I'm realizing I don't hate you as much as I thought, he said. She looked up. What do you think? He hesitated. It's good. Too on the nose? No, just familiar. How so? He met her eyes. Because it sounds like us. Maggie blinked, then smiled slowly. Maybe it does. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire popped. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees. Something in the silence felt fragile but alive. Then she cleared her throat. Well, that's enough emotional vulnerability for one night. Agreed. Morning arrived wrapped in mist and the smell of pine. Brad woke first, blinking at the soft light filtering through the curtains. Maggie was still asleep in the other bed, hair spilling across the pillow in auburn waves. He sat there for a moment, notebook in hand, sketching a few lines before he could stop himself. She looked peaceful in the quiet light, like someone who'd finally found the place her dreams could rest. He stared at the words, mortified by his own sentimentality, and shut the notebook fast. Maggie stirred. Writing already? Just notes, he said quickly. You, snore a little. I do not. You do. Like a polite kitten. She threw a pillow at him. You're impossible. Accurate. The rest of the day passed in workshops and laughter. They read, edited, and laughed some more. By the time evening rolled around, every team had to perform their one-page scene for the group. Brad and Maggie went last. Their reading was meant to be dramatic, but halfway through, she started ad-libbing lines, forcing him to improvise. Why are you looking at me like that? She said, eyes glinting mischievously. Because you're impossible, he said, slipping out of character. And yet you're still here, she countered. The group laughed, clapping at their chemistry. Mrs. Talbot beamed. Marvelous. Authentic. The tension felt real. Brad could feel his pulse in his ears. Real indeed. Later, as the group roasted marshmallows by the fire pit, Maggie nudged him. You know, for a guy who claimed he couldn't write romance, you're kind of a natural. Maybe I just have a good teacher. She smiled. Or maybe you finally believe in happy endings again. He looked at her, the firelight dancing in her green eyes, and for once didn't deflect with sarcasm. Maybe I do. They lingered after everyone else had gone inside. The lake reflected the moon like spilled silver, and the air smelled of smoke and pine. Maggie sipped her cocoa. So what happens when this project's over? He shrugged. We keep writing, I guess. That's not what I meant. He turned to face her. I know. A pause. Then she smiled softly. You ever notice how every story starts with two people pretending they're not interested? He laughed quietly. Yeah. And then one of them finally does something stupidly brave? Usually. She tilted her head. Well, Brad's heart thudded. He took a breath, stepped closer, and said, guess it's my turn then. And before his brain could catch up, he kissed her. It wasn't movie perfect. Too much surprise, too little choreography, but it was honest. Warm. Exactly what it needed to be. When they finally pulled back, Maggie whispered, that was not part of the writing exercise. Artistic improvisation, he said. She grinned. You're learning. The next morning, they packed up, both pretending nothing monumental had happened. But every glance, every brush of fingers, said otherwise. As they loaded the car, Mrs. Talbot called out, you two were the hit of the retreat. I can't wait to see how your story ends. Brad and Maggie exchanged a look. Neither can we, he said. That night, back home, Rebecca greeted him at the door. So, how was the professional retreat? He hesitated. Productive. And Maggie? He tried for casual. She's good. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Good like great collaborator. Or good like you kissed her by a lake under the stars. He froze. What? How did you? I know narrative structure, Dad. He groaned. I'm surrounded by women who know too much. She smiled. And you love it. He sighed, then smiled back. Yeah, I really do. Chapter 8. The sequel proposal. Monday mornings were never kind to Brad Simpson. This one, however, felt especially vindictive. His alarm shrieked at 6:30 a.m., and for one disoriented moment he forgot that he was no longer sleeping in a cabin smelling faintly of pine, smoke, and Maggie's shampoo. The illusion shattered when he rolled over and landed on his notebook instead of a pillow. He groaned. Reality, you're cruel. Downstairs, Rebecca was already clattering dishes in the kitchen. She had that suspiciously cheerful hum that every teenager gets when they're about to start meddling. Brad trudged in, hair askew, still half asleep. Morning. Morning, Rebecca said brightly. Sleep well, Romeo? He sighed. Let's not start. Dad, you kissed her. He blinked. I what? Oh please. You're glowing. You're basically a Hallmark movie in cargo shorts. Brad reached for the coffee pot. You shouldn't make assumptions. You're smiling. Coffee makes me smile. She snorted. Sure it does. Before he could muster a comeback, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Subject, congratulations from Starlight Press. He frowned, opened the email, and nearly dropped his mug. Dear Mr. Simpson and Ms. McCardel, we are pleased to inform you that your manuscript, Accidental Hearts, has been selected for publication. Furthermore, the editorial board loved your chemistry, on and off the page. We'd like to offer you both a 2-book contract, pending your acceptance. Sincerely, Caitlin Reeves, Senior Editor, Starlight Press. He stared at the screen, mouth open. Rebecca leaned over his shoulder. Wait, that's the big publisher you mentioned. Uh-huh. And they want 2 books. Apparently. She grinned. Oh my God, Dad. You're a published author. He blinked again. I guess I am. Does Maggie know? He glanced at the timestamp, sent to both of them. She knows. Then what are you doing standing there? Call her. 10 minutes later, Brad was pacing the living room with his phone pressed to his ear. Maggie answered on the second ring. So you got the email too? I did, he said, trying to sound calm. I think my heart stopped around pleased to inform you. She laughed, that warm, musical laugh he was quickly getting addicted to. We did it, Brad. We did. Together. Can you believe it? Nope. I'm half convinced it's spam. Spam doesn't usually come with publishing contracts. True. Though I've seen stranger phishing scams. She chuckled. You're impossible. So what do we do first? Well, he said, glancing around at the chaos of dishes, unpaid bills, and one extremely nosy teenager pretending not to eavesdrop. I suppose we celebrate? I like the sound of that. Dinner tonight. Dinner. His heart did a small somersault. As in not in a cabin, not pretending to be fictional, and definitely not an assignment. Right? Dinner. Totally normal. I can do dinner. Relax, Brad. It's just food. He exhaled. Food I will definitely overthink. Wouldn't expect anything less. That evening, he spent 20 minutes deciding between 2 shirts that looked identical, 5 more trying to tame his hair, and a full 10 pacing the hallway while Rebecca heckled him from the couch. You're acting like you've never been on a date before. That's because I haven't, he said. Not since smartphones existed. She grinned. Want me to run interference if you panic? Please don't. Should I text Linda? She'll want updates. Absolutely not. She held up her phone. Too late. Rebecca. Relax, Dad. Go. Have fun. I'm proud of you. He paused, thrown off by the sudden sincerity. You are. Yeah, she said softly. You rebuilt your whole life from scratch. It's about time you did something for yourself. For a moment, Brad couldn't find words. He just smiled, kissed her forehead, and said, Thanks, kiddo. Maggie chose a little Italian place downtown, candlelit, but casual enough that Brad didn't feel out of place. When he arrived, she was already seated by the window, red hair catching the glow of the streetlights like a live flame. Hey, partner, she said, standing to hug him. He hesitated a beat before hugging back. She smelled like citrus and paperbacks. You look great, he said, then instantly regretted how earnest he sounded. She smiled. Thanks. So do you. Nervous? Always. Good. Means you care. They ordered wine, clinked glasses, and spent the first few minutes marveling at the absurdity of their success. 6 months ago, Maggie said, you were the quiet guy in the back of the library workshop who winced whenever someone said the word romance. And now I'm contractually obligated to write 2 of them. Life's funny like that. It's something, he said. I'm still waiting for someone to jump out and yell pranked. Nope, she said, smiling. This is real. He looked at her for a long moment. I think that's what scares me. She softened. Brad, you don't have to be afraid of good things. He smiled wryly. Tell that to my last marriage. That wasn't a good thing, she said gently. That was survival. This, she gestured between them, is discovery. He blinked. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Careful, she teased. You'll ruin my reputation. They both laughed, the kind of easy, genuine laughter that made the rest of the restaurant blur into background noise. After dinner, they strolled downtown beneath strings of fairy lights that someone, somewhere, had clearly hung for cinematic effect. The evening had cooled, and Maggie's hand brushed his as they walked. Neither pulled away. So, she said, a sequel. Right, he said. Because one romance novel wasn't enough emotional trauma. She smirked. You loved it. I tolerated it. You adored it. He sighed. Fine. I adored it. See? Progress. They stopped near the bookstore window, where a display of great love stories of the 21st century sat in perfect irony. Maggie's reflection glimmered in the glass beside his. Think we'll end up in there someday? She asked lightly. Only if they run out of options. Or if we write something honest. He turned to her. That's what scares me most. Honesty. Yeah. Because it feels like every time I get honest about how I feel, the universe punishes me. She looked up at him. What if, this time, the universe is trying to make up for it? And just like that, he was speechless again. Over the next few weeks, Accidental Hearts became the little story that could. Starlight Press announced it on their social channels. Local bookstores asked them to sign copies once released. Even the library workshop hosted a Meet the Authors night. Brad was both thrilled and horrified. Maggie, of course, thrived under pressure. At the event, she stood at the podium, effortlessly charming a crowd of 30 readers. Brad sat beside her, palms sweating, trying not to die. And what started as a reluctant partnership, Maggie said into the mic, turned into something far more rewarding than either of us expected. Polite applause. Cameras flashed. Brad smiled awkwardly and tried not to look like a man experiencing an existential crisis. Afterward, Mrs. Talbot pulled him aside. Brad, I have to say, watching your growth has been inspiring. He blinked. Growth. When you joined, you barely spoke. Now look at you, smiling, collaborating, publishing. He smiled sheepishly. Well, I had help. Yes, she said, eyes twinkling. You and Maggie make quite the pair. He felt his cheeks warm. We do work well together. Work, she repeated knowingly. Of course. Later, back at Maggie's apartment, because somehow, celebratory tea had turned into another late-night brainstorming session. They sat side by side on her couch surrounded by manuscript pages, pizza boxes, and laughter. So the sequel, she said, needs to feel bigger but still true. Real stakes, real emotions. Translation, he said. We have to fall in love twice. Exactly. He rubbed the back of his neck. Do you think people will buy it? She looked at him, her expression softening. They already did. He smiled faintly. I know what you meant, she said gently. But Brad, if you're asking whether this, us, feels real. She reached out and took his hand. Then yeah, it does. Silence settled. The kind of silence that fills every gap words can't. Brad swallowed. You sure about this? About me? Positive. You're the only man I know who can make cynicism sound romantic. That's my brand. She laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. Don't change it. 2 weeks later, their editor scheduled a video meeting to finalize the contract. Caitlin Reeves was brisk, efficient, and disarmingly enthusiastic. I just want to say, she said through the screen, your story has such authenticity. The chemistry feels lived in. Our readers will love it. Brad blushed. Thanks. We, did a lot of research. Maggie smirked. Extensive field work. Caitlin laughed. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. We'll send the official paperwork tomorrow. As the call ended, Brad exhaled. Well, that's that. Officially official. Maggie grinned. You realize we're professional romantics now. He chuckled. Who'd have thought? You apparently. You kissed me first. Details, he said. She leaned in. I like those details. That evening, he went home in a daze. Rebecca was waiting with a triumphant grin and 2 pints of ice cream. Figured you'd want to celebrate. You knew? Linda saw Maggie's post. Hashtag dream team. He groaned. I'm doomed. She really likes you. You know? Rebecca said. Likes you. He smiled softly. Yeah, I think I like her too. Think. He shrugged. I've learned not to tempt fate by labeling things too early. Rebecca handed him a spoon. Fate can deal with it. Later that night, sitting at his desk, Brad opened a new notebook. He wrote, 6 months ago, I joined a writing group to fill the quiet. Instead, I found a woman who filled the silence with laughter. Maybe love doesn't return when you chase it. Maybe it sneaks in when you stop running. He stared at the words, smiled, and signed his name at the bottom, not as Brad Simpson, accountant, but as Brad Simpson, author. Then he closed the notebook and whispered to himself, sequel pending. Chapter 9, Book Tour, Butterflies, and the Big Confession. Brad Simpson had never signed anything that wasn't a tax form. Now, people wanted his autograph. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent most of his life balancing spreadsheets, and now strangers were lining up at bookstores to have him sign copies of Accidental Hearts, a novel about love, second chances, and the audacity of middle-aged vulnerability. He was living a plot twist he couldn't have written. The first stop of the book tour was in Madison, a cozy indie bookstore that smelled like coffee, new paper, and existential ambition. Maggie was, of course, radiant, relaxed, witty, and completely in her element. Brad, on the other hand, was sweating through his nicest shirt. Relax, Maggie whispered as they took their seats at the signing table. You look like you're about to testify before Congress. I feel like I am, he muttered. Except this time the public actually cares. She grinned. You'll be fine. Just smile, sign, and try not to spell your name wrong. Ha. A young woman approached first, clutching the book like it contained secrets to life itself. Hi. Oh my gosh, I loved your story. It felt so real. Are you too? She gestured vaguely between them. Maggie smiled. Co-workers. Collaborators. Brad added. Co-conspirators in caffeine abuse. The woman laughed, satisfied, and left with a signed copy. But as the line continued, the same question kept appearing in different forms. So are you two really? Did you base the couple on yourselves? Any chance for a movie adaptation starring you? By the 10th question, Brad leaned toward Maggie. We need a prepared statement. Sure, she said. How about? No comment, but by the sequel. He chuckled. Effective. After the event, they grabbed dinner at a tiny bistro near the bookstore. Brad was still buzzing with disbelief. Did we just have fans? We did, Maggie said. And they didn't even throw tomatoes. Yet. She sipped her wine, eyes glinting. You're not allowed to be self-deprecating tonight. You're a published author. I'm still an accountant by day. Yeah, but now you're an accountant with fan mail. That's an upgrade. He smiled. When did my life turn into a Nora Ephron movie? Probably around the time you kissed your co-writer at a lake. He laughed. Yeah, that'll do it. The tour continued. Chicago, Minneapolis, then back home. Each event felt easier, smoother. Brad began to enjoy it. The conversations, the laughter, even the questions about whether he believed in love. He did now, though he still pretended to dodge the question. But somewhere between the travel and the publicity, something began to shift between him and Maggie. The easy banter was still there, but so was something quieter, something that lingered in the pauses. After one event, while packing up, Maggie said softly, "It's weird, isn't it? Writing about falling in love, then realizing you actually did." He froze. "You mean?" She smiled faintly. "I mean, I'm not sure where fiction ends anymore." Brad opened his mouth, then closed it. "That makes two of us." By the third tour stop, Brad had started to recognize the symptoms of mild panic, sweaty palms, racing heart, and the distinct sense that he was on the verge of emotional honesty. It was terrifying. He tried to focus on logistics, flights, interviews, the sequel outline. But Maggie kept looking at him with that calm, steady warmth that made his carefully built walls look ridiculous. At their final stop, during a live Q&A, a middle-aged man raised his hand. "Question for both of you," he said. "How do you write about love after heartbreak?" The room went still. Even Maggie looked thoughtful. Then she said, "You don't write after heartbreak. You write through it. That's what Brad and I learned. Love doesn't erase pain. It just changes how you carry it." Brad looked at her, struck by how simply she said it. When the applause came, he barely heard it. That night, back at the hotel, Brad knocked on her door. He didn't plan what he was going to say. He never did, which was half his problem. Maggie opened the door, barefoot, wearing a loose cardigan and the same kind expression that undid him every time. "Hey," she said softly. "Can't sleep?" He shook his head. "Can we talk?" "Of course." He stepped inside, sat on the edge of the bed, and exhaled. "I don't know how to do this." She sat beside him. "Do what? Whatever this is. I'm not 25 anymore. I don't know the rules." "There aren't any," she said gently. "There never were." He looked down at his hands. "You deserve someone who's sure of himself." "I'm still figuring it out." She smiled sadly. "Brad, no one's ever sure." "Not really. We just pretend better." He met her gaze, his voice quiet. "I don't want to pretend with you." "Then don't." That did it. The air between them seemed to shift, soft, electric, inevitable. He leaned forward, slower this time, and kissed her. It wasn't impulsive like the first. It was steady, deliberate, real. When they finally broke apart, Maggie whispered, "You overthink everything. Occupational hazard. You're impossible." "And yet," he said, smiling, "you're still here." She rolled her eyes fondly. That line again. It's a classic. The next morning, Brad woke early, sunlight pouring through the curtains. Maggie was still asleep, and he sat there, staring at her and realizing, with a mix of terror and joy, that he was in love again. Not the reckless kind that comes with youth. The quiet, earned kind. The kind that feels like home. He slipped out quietly, grabbed coffee downstairs, and opened his notebook. A new idea had been forming since the tour started. An idea for a story about a man who thought his life ended at 40, but discovered it was just the prologue. He smiled to himself and wrote, Chapter 1. He didn't believe in happy endings anymore, but she did. So she wrote one for him. A week later, they were back home. Rebecca met him at the door, eyes sparkling. "So, how was it, Mr. Celebrity?" He grinned. "Exhausting. Wonderful. Confusing." "Confusing?" He hesitated. "Maggie and I. Well, we're kind of together now." Rebecca gasped. "Finally, don't act like you didn't predict it." "I manifested it," she said proudly. He chuckled. "Of course you did." Rebecca smiled, then grew serious. "You look happy, Dad." He paused, surprised by the simple truth of it. "Yeah," he said softly. "I am." Over the next month, Brad and Maggie settled into something that resembled a rhythm. Writing, dinners, quiet weekends filled with laughter and the occasional debate about plot structure. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. One evening, they met with their editor, Caitlin, at a downtown cafe to discuss the sequel. "I have to say," Caitlin said, stirring her tea, "readers are obsessed with you too." Maggie grinned. "We're trending romantically." Brad muttered, "That's terrifying." Caitlin ignored him. "So here's what I'm thinking. What if your second book isn't just a sequel? What if it's meta? A love story about two writers who fall for each other while writing." Brad blinked. "That's suspiciously familiar." Maggie smirked. "You mean autobiographical?" Caitlin clapped her hands. "Exactly. It's honest. It's real. It's what readers want." Brad exchanged a look with Maggie. "You in?" She smiled. "Always." That night, after dropping her off, Brad sat in his car for a while, thinking. The streetlights reflected off his windshield, blurring into gold halos. He realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. And maybe, just maybe, the best stories weren't written on paper. They were lived between the lines. He pulled out his phone and texted her, "Brad, you know, if this next book is about us, we should probably make sure it has a good ending." Maggie, "Oh, what kind of ending?" Brad, "The kind where the guy doesn't mess it up." Maggie, "Then you'd better keep writing, Simpson." He smiled at the screen and whispered, "Deal." Back home, Rebecca and Linda were in the kitchen, deep in some dramatic debate about artificial intelligence ethics and chocolate chip ratios. When they saw him, Rebecca grinned. "So how's the girlfriend?" He blinked. "You just say that out loud now." "Of course. We're past denial. We're in the montage phase." He chuckled. I don't know about a montage. Linda piped up. Oh, you totally have one. Coffee dates, bookstores, laughter in slow motion. Brad groaned. You two are incorrigible. Rebecca smiled. We're just proud of you. You did it. He frowned. Did what? Started over. That night, he found himself back at his desk, staring at a blank page again. Only this time, he didn't feel lost. He began to type. Love isn't about rewriting the past. It's about writing anyway, even when the paper's been torn. He stopped, reread the line, and smiled. Because for the first time in years, Brad Simpson wasn't afraid of the blank page. He was ready to fill it. Chapter 10, Happily Ever After. With rewrites, Brad Simpson had learned a lot in the last year. He'd learned that heartbreak doesn't kill you. It just leaves you with a strange appreciation for wine and self-help podcasts. He'd learned that it's possible to fall in love again after 40, provided you're brave enough to risk looking ridiculous. And, most surprisingly, he'd learned that writing a romance novel is a lot easier than living one. 1. The rewrite. It was Saturday morning, and his kitchen table looked like a small war zone. Coffee cups, open notebooks, and a laptop that had crashed 3 times before breakfast. The sequel manuscript sat in front of him, covered in Maggie's edits. He read the latest margin note aloud. Brad, your hero sounds like he's auditioning for a tax audit. Add some passion. He muttered. She says that like it's a bad thing. From the living room came her voice. I heard that. Maggie appeared, hair in a messy bun, wearing his old flannel shirt that looked far too good on her. She carried 2 mugs of coffee and a grin that made the morning brighter. You're stalling, she said, setting a mug beside him. I'm reflecting. On what? How I, a man with the emotional range of a stapler, ended up writing this. He waved the pages. There's kissing. Multiple times. Scandalous, she teased. I'll alert the media. He smiled. Too late. They already know. 2. Domestic chaos and company. Rebecca burst through the door a few minutes later, followed by Linda, both carrying grocery bags and the kind of energy that suggested impending chaos. Dad, you're hosting dinner tonight, Rebecca announced. I am. You are now, Linda said cheerfully. It's a celebration dinner. 1 year since Accidental Hearts was published. Brad blinked. You two just invent events now? Tradition has to start somewhere, Rebecca said, unloading vegetables. You cook. We decorate. Maggie leaned toward Brad and whispered, You're not winning this argument. I noticed. An hour later, the kitchen smelled like garlic and optimism. Maggie stirred sauce on the stove while Brad chopped vegetables under Rebecca's supervision. So, Dad, Rebecca said casually, you and Maggie are basically living together, right? Brad nearly dropped the knife. Excuse me. Maggie didn't miss a beat. It's a fair question. It's a personal question. Linda grinned. That means yes. Brad groaned. You two are like investigative journalists. Rebecca smiled sweetly. We just like happy endings. 3. The dinner scene. By 7 o'clock, the table was set, candles lit, music soft in the background. Sandy arrived with dessert, lemon tart, and her trademark calm presence. It smells amazing, she said, hugging Brad. You look good, by the way. Happier. He smiled. Thanks, Sandy. Feels weird, doesn't it? A year ago, I was hiding from life. Now I'm hosting dinner parties. You deserve it, she said simply. And for the record, Maggie's good for you. He nodded, glancing at Maggie, who was laughing at something Rebecca said. Yeah, he murmured. She really is. Dinner was loud, funny, and full of overlapping conversations. Linda and Rebecca arguing about AI ethics again, Sandy and Maggie swapping recipes, Brad mostly watching, heart full. He'd never imagined this version of family, but he wouldn't trade it for anything. Halfway through dessert, Rebecca raised her glass. To Dad and Maggie, authors, partners, and official proof that middle age is just Act 2. Act 2, Brad asked. Does that mean there's an Act 3? Maggie clinked her glass against his. Only if we keep writing. 4. A quiet moment. Later, after everyone had left and the dishes were done, Brad found Maggie out on the porch. She was curled up on the swing, blanket around her shoulders, stars reflected in her wine glass. He joined her, sitting close enough that their knees brushed. Good party, he said. Your daughter's a force of nature. She gets that from her mother, he said quietly, then added. But the kindness, that's new. Maggie smiled. You did good with her. Thanks. I tried. A long silence stretched between them, comfortable and full. Finally, she said, do you ever think about how weird this all is? That we met because of a random ticket draw. Every day. And now what are we exactly? He considered. Happy. She laughed. Good answer. He reached for her hand. You know, when we started that first project, I thought I was learning to write about love. Turns out, I was learning to live it. Maggie squeezed his hand. Careful, Simpson. That's almost poetic. Occupational hazard. 5. The big question. A week later, their publisher threw a party for the launch of their second novel, Rewritten Hearts. The bookstore was packed again, the crowd buzzing, flashbulbs popping. Brad had worn the same shirt from their first signing, mostly for luck, and because it still fit, barely. During the Q&A, a woman asked, will there be a third book? Maggie smiled mysteriously. Maybe. Then she turned to Brad. What do you think, partner? He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. Actually, I was thinking about writing something else first. Maggie frowned playfully. A solo project? Betrayal. He pulled out a small, square box. Not exactly. The room collectively inhaled. Maggie blinked. Brad. He opened the box. The ring wasn't flashy, just simple and elegant, like everything he'd learned to value again. He said, voice steady but eyes suspiciously shiny. You once told me that laughter is the foundation of love. So I figured, if you'll marry me, we'll have a lifetime of solid material. The crowd gasped, laughed, then applauded. Maggie covered her mouth, eyes wide. Brad Simpson, she said softly. You are utterly ridiculous. I know. And completely perfect. He grinned. Is that a yes? She kissed him, long and sure. That's a yes. The audience erupted. Someone shouted, sequel confirmed. And the room burst into laughter. 6. Happily ever after, with rewrites. 6 months later, their wedding was small, just family and close friends. Rebecca was maid of honor, naturally, and delivered a speech so sentimental even Brad teared up, and he blamed the champagne. Maggie looked stunning in simple ivory, her red hair shining in the afternoon sun. Brad, in his suit and signature nervous smile, couldn't stop looking at her. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," he whispered, "Ready for the next chapter?" She smiled. "Only if you promise to proofread." Always. They kissed to the sound of applause and clinking glasses. Epilogue. A year later, their new book hit the shelves, The Rewrite of Us, co-written, co-lived, and dedicated to everyone who thought the story was over. It wasn't. Brad sat at his desk one morning, the house quiet except for the faint sound of Maggie humming in the kitchen. Rebecca had graduated, Linda was applying to grad school, and life, real, messy, beautiful life, had settled into something steady. He looked at the framed photo on his desk, him and Maggie at their signing, smiling like idiots. Beneath it was a note in her handwriting. You didn't just learn to write a love story. You became one. Brad chuckled softly, picked up his pen, and began jotting ideas for the next book. Maybe it wouldn't sell 1,000,000 copies. Maybe it would. Either way, he knew how it ended. With laughter, with hope, and with the quiet certainty that sometimes, even the most broken stories can find their rewrite. Epilogue. The encore, 2 years later. The community library smelled exactly the same as it always had. Coffee, old paper, and the faint panic of overdue books. Brad Simpson stood at the front of the same meeting room where his writing group had once gathered. Only this time, he was the guest speaker. On the whiteboard behind him, someone had scrawled in bright blue marker, "An evening with local author Brad Simpson. How to write about love when you're terrible at it." Maggie was sitting in the front row, arms folded, her grin so wide it was practically glowing. Rebecca sat beside her, now 21 and engaged, holding hands with a sweet, nervous guy named Owen who looked like he'd wandered in from a tech startup. Linda sat next to them, filming everything for social media. Brad suspected she'd add dramatic background music later. He cleared his throat. "Hi, everyone. I'm Brad. Once upon a time, I thought writing romance was impossible. Then I met someone who convinced me that the real secret to writing love stories is to accidentally fall into one." The audience laughed. Maggie gave a mock bow from her seat. Brad continued, "A wise editor once told me that every good story needs conflict, tension, and at least one scene involving emotional panic in a restaurant. I'm proud to say I delivered all 3. Sometimes twice." Another round of laughter. Brad relaxed a little. But the truth is, love, real love, isn't about dramatic confessions or perfect timing. It's about burnt dinners, mismatched schedules, and still wanting to show up the next day. It's about finding someone who makes even the boring days feel worth writing about. He paused, catching Maggie's gaze. "And if you're lucky, that someone will also have great editing skills. Or a better vocabulary," she called out. "Also true," he said, smiling. "Anyway, that's what I learned. Stories don't end at the end. They just get new chapters. So write them, live them, and remember, every rewrite is a chance to make it better." The audience applauded. Brad stepped down, and Rebecca ran up to hug him. "Dad, that was perfect," she said. "You didn't even make any Excel jokes." "I'm growing as a person," he said. Painfully, Maggie joined them, slipping her hand into his. "Proud of you, writer man." He kissed her forehead. "Thanks, editor lady." Linda grinned. "Okay, everyone smile for the Where Are They Now post." She snapped a photo, Brad with his arm around Maggie, Rebecca laughing beside Owen, Sandy in the background chatting with the librarian. It was chaotic. It was ordinary. It was perfect. Later that night, as they walked to the car, Maggie nudged him. "So what's next, Simpson?" He shrugged. "I was thinking maybe we write a mystery." She raised an eyebrow. "About what?" He grinned. "About how a guy like me ended up with a woman like you." She laughed. "That's not a mystery. That's a miracle." He opened the car door for her, smiling. "Same thing, isn't it?" They drove off into the soft glow of streetlights, the world quiet around them. Somewhere, a song started playing on the radio, a little too romantic, a little too perfect, and Brad chuckled. "Great," he said. "Now my life has a soundtrack." Maggie reached over, turned up the volume, and said, "Finally." And for once, Brad didn't overthink it. He just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other in hers, the road ahead wide open. The end. For real this time.